recording. Now the recording's back on. Anyway, it was kind of the urgency thing with the alt-right when I first inserted it. Now, hopefully, they're going to stay down and not resurge again. It doesn't look like that's going to happen in this current election cycle, hopefully. So hopefully they will stay as a very recent example of how fascism, how Nazism, how that ideology comes to power. Because if you look at the history of the Nazi Party in Germany, there were really super tight parallels between the rise of the Nazi Party and what was happening in the alt-right. Thank goodness it looks like they're not becoming their own powerful political party, because the thing about fascists in government is that they absolutely ideologically will use democracy in order to get power, right? And have I talked about Popper's paradox at all in this course? What's called Popper's paradox? Popper's paradox is always something good to mention. It's not going to be on the exam. Popper's paradox is an idea that extremists basically, by nature of being extremists, especially Nazis and right-wing extremists, very similar to Nazis, but it also applies to like extreme communists too. Nazis will use democracy to gain power, and then once they get power, they basically come after all of their enemies because they don't respect democracy, because they're inherently anti-democratic. It's really the basis of, it is a very good stance, actually, to not negotiate with Nazis, to not debate Nazis, to not let Nazis be on college campuses, because their ideology inherently wants to murder a lot of us, right? Like a whole lot of us. And I am actually very thoroughly by blood German, but by my virtue of being anti-Nazi, I would be on that list too. Yeah, anyway. That's a big reason why I emphasize the alt-right stuff in this course, is because it's something we have to stay vigilant about. Okay, so, and then Steve Bannon, what did that guy do?
Sorry, I just have a quick question.
Great.
So so with all this stuff that we're having again connected to social problems. So when we're talking about alt-right and the Richard Spencer, if we're writing about it in the exam, are you wanting us to connect it to because of this racial issue, you want us to connect it to the sociology side of it's going to break down parts of our systems because of this kind of, I don't know how to make this make sense. I'm sorry.
No, I totally get the question you're asking. There's no shame in it. It is, what is the essay? Let me take a quick gander. I'm not going to tell you exactly what the essay is, but let me just take a quick peek and remind myself what's happening there. Yeah, there's absolutely no shame in trying to drill me for the essay hints. Okay, 1 second, let me just take a peek. Remind myself, really. Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. So, the short answer to that is because, wait, are we still here? Okay, good. One of my other applications closed out on me. Because I've made you write about this stuff already, because you've already gotten points actually about a lot of that alt-right stuff, it is not one of the essay questions, so don't worry too much about it. Just worry about it in terms of knowing those associated terms is really the short angle to it. Yeah. And really, there are the points in here, right? This stuff up here is the multiple choice stuff, right? This stuff down here, there are multiple choices in there. There is also the makings of the essay question. So if there's something in there you really don't, oh, you don't see that window. I'm sorry. Let me share my window with you. Okay. Okay, there we are. You see my, yeah, you see my word right now. Okay, so as I was saying, you see my word now, right? Yeah, okay, great. So this stuff up here, this is the multiple choice section, right? All of these terms. This portion down here is more the essay fodder, right? Some of these things are going to be multiple choice. They're more complex multiple choice questions. If you know anything about Bloom's taxonomy, which I don't know why you would unless you were an education major, these are the more intense ones as far as that goes, but there are some essay stuff in there too. So among these questions, if there's anything there you don't understand, put a little bit more effort into that, is the short of it. So now that we are out of those specific, now that we're out of these characters, are there any questions about either the define the terms or the more complex questions?
Yeah, can we go over down below where it talks about can a nation exist without being a state?
Yes, absolutely. So first off, what can anyone tell me? I always, where to start here? What is a nation?
A nation is a group of people that share like culture, whereas like a state would be like a physical location, is what I got from it.
Correct. Good, good. And then what is a nation state?
That confuses me.
Okay, okay, that's fine. Okay. That's why we're here. So a group of people is a nation, right? Of a given identity. You can use in a sort of clumsy way ethnicity to also mean nation. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm actually also teaching this concept in an anthropology class right now. I teach that in a slightly different way, but it's about the same. A state, as we said, yes, is a government zone. It's geographic territory. It can be seen as like a jurisdiction or a sovereign area. Now, the concept of the nation state is actually how we usually think of countries in the modern world. Most countries that we think of them in terms of being nation states. They are people with collective identities that all live within a given territory, right? The real clear examples of nation states are places like Japan, Russia, Germany, the United Kingdom, right? German people who live in Germany tend to be overwhelmingly German. They have a German identity. They live within Germany. Nation and state overlap, right? Japan, Japanese people live in Japan. Nation and state overlap. England, same thing. Actually, United Kingdom. England's just a small part of the United Kingdom. But there is an overlapping there. Now, when this concept came into being in the late 1800s, there has actually been a tremendous amount of effort put into play into making Americans feel like Americans, right? Into making us feel like we do have a common identity, that commonality, and that game effort has been going for about 150 years now, to the point of when you think of what it means to be American, we do kind of have a concept there. It can sometimes be kind of problematic. It can sometimes skew white, unfortunately, but our concept of American is to the point where we are also a nation and a state, right? Does that make more sense? Did I confuse anyone there? Okay, good. An example of a nation that, of a state that doesn't really have a nation is actually Iraq. Iraq is actually a state with three very distinct nations of people living within it. That is largely because of British colonialism at the beginning of the 1900s. And we see this all throughout Africa, the Middle East, parts of Asia, some parts of South America, where the actual identities of the people living there don't necessarily match the actual boundaries, which is, and a good indicator of that anywhere around the world is where you see like super straight boundaries that just seem to like cut across without like following mountains or anything. But that's beside the point. So getting to that question, can nations exist without a state? What is an example of a nation without a state? I'll tell you, yes, they can. What's an example?
Would that be like an Amish community or like an Indian reservation?
Oh, God, man, you hit on something that I know a really nerdy amount about. Yes. So Native American nations or tribes are really good examples of nations without states, in particular, tribes that do not have reservation set aside for them. There are many tribes that don't have reservations. You can make an argument that the way reservations are set up is kind of a quasi-state, but yeah, that's a good example. Now the Amish are a smaller subset of, and this is my heritage, so I know a whole lot about it. The Amish are a smaller subset of the Pennsylvania Dutch. The Pennsylvania Dutch, some Amish are Pennsylvania Dutch. Some Pennsylvania Dutch are Amish, not all Amish are, let me re-say that. The Pennsylvania Dutch are not all Amish, right? There are many Pennsylvania Dutch who are not Amish. I'm one of them, right? We are a group of people who are a type of nation, sort of. It's kind of loose. We're not really quite a nation. We're more of a straight up ethnicity, but there is a large portion of Pennsylvania Dutch people who do live in Eastern Pennsylvania down into Maryland. And they do have that common kind of national identity that's an okay example. Yeah. So restate all that madness. So yeah, Native American tribes, primo example. The Laplanders in Northern Europe are a good example. They don't have a country, right? Any group of people that is big, that have a common identity, but they don't actually have a country, can usually be called a nation, usually. Any other questions? And when I'm looking up and away, it's because my projector is up there.
Could you briefly go over the relationship between mental health and mass violence?
Yes. So, and we talked about this a little bit already in the course, and we've talked about all this stuff already in the course. The best explanation we have regarding mass violence as to why it is such an overwhelming problem in the United States is two-pronged. the simpler explanation, which isn't the whole thing, is that we have a whole lot of guns, right? That's the simple, relatively obvious explanation, but it's not the whole piece. It's not just guns either. It's not rifles. It's not handguns. It is guns that shoot a lot of bullets all at once, right? And that's part of it, but it's not all of it. The other piece of that is that we lack mental health infrastructure in the United States. So when people have mental health issues, they can't go get help. It's not easy for them to get help. And tie in with that, we stigmatize people when they do have mental health issues. So we see people as being unfit to do their job when they have mental health issues, for example, which scientifically is really messed up because there's good evidence to show that mental health issues are just as common as physical health issues. So over the course of our lifetimes, everyone has suffered from mental illness of one kind or another. So it's two-pronged, right? One portion of it is, we have a lot of guns that can shoot a lot of bullets all at once. That's definitely a thing. But the other issue of it that we could do more, right, regardless of politics, is being able to fund mental health hospitals and mental health facilities and counselors in schools that can talk to people and all that. Does that make sense? Good. Okay. Anything else?
For what motivates terrorism, I remember it saying that they're politically and religiously motivated. And then in the lecture, it said not ideologically universal. And what was that? What does that mean?
Okay, good. I guess that could be confusing. Ideology and religion absolutely can drive terrorism. It can, and it's a big driver of terrorism. Desperation can also drive terrorism. It's all kind of one horrible bundle, really. But my point with not ideologically universal is that terrorism is a tactic. It is not an ideology, right? Which I think is a lot easier for younger people to understand than those of us who lived through like the heyday of the war on terror, because there was a common misconception that there was an ideology, like a universal ideology of terrorism, and that looked like Islamic fundamentalism. The reality of the matter is that terrorism is something that any number of groups of people can do, and it doesn't depend on what you specifically believe, right? So example, yes, there are Islamic fundamentalist terrorists, but there are also Christian fundamentalist terrorists who bomb things as well. And those are both terrorism. They're just used by people that believe different things. In the 1970s and 1960s, there were boatloads of leftist communist terrorists around the world, and they believed maybe the exact opposite of right-wing religiously motivated terrorists. Does that make sense? Yeah, I probably could state that a little more clear. I just wanted to emphasize that unfortunately, any group of radicalized people could hypothetically do terrorism. Yeah.
Would you mind highlighting some important notes that we need to know about Steve Bannon as well? Like what would be the most important things to know about him?
I guess I left him out. Yeah, I guess I didn't actually get to that. What you need to know about Steve Bannon is that he was I don't even recall myself. What did he hold he was he chief of staff for Trump at the beginning? Something like that. He was like a close confidant, right? And that in and of itself, somebody being a close confidant of the president, that's not really that notable in terms of social problems. But the thing is that Bannon specifically has been known for his extremist ideologies, right? For his anti Semitic ideologies, for his racist ideologies surrounding the Breitbart organization. And he really is the kind of no holds barred media slash propaganda person that is eerily similar, and I don't say this lightly, I really don't, but eerily similar to Joseph Goebbels in the Third Reich with Hitler. Like, Bannon is a scary dude in terms of his ability to wrap and warp propaganda. He is no longer in place. That's very fortunate. Yeah, and yeah, this unit. I try to keep this unit as apolitical as possible with while addressing serious issues. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway. Good. Does that help, John?
Yes, sir. That does help me. Thank you. I was
Okay.
just seeing like the main point. So he
Yeah.
was like Trump's right-hand man, but he's known for like warping political messages and being like kind of out there on the racist and anti-Semitic spectrum.
Right. Right. He was an extreme. He still is an extremist, and the troubling element of him. I mean, there's a lot of extremists in our society. The troubling element of him is that he was a very close confidant of the president for a while. He's no longer that way, but he was a scary dude to be in that position. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Anything else?
I just want to make sure. Oh, sorry. You can go ahead.
Go ahead,
Go
Danielle.
ahead. Okay. Is Jingoism bad or good? Like, I know it's good because it has to do with unity of a nation, but bad because it has to do with also aggressive warlike policies.
Yeah, that's kind of a philosophical question. Is jingoism bad? Usually, when people when they call it jingoism, they usually are talking about it in a negative way. And it is an interesting philosophical question. There's national pride, right? And believing that your country can do things. And even if you have to do a military thing, there's a lot of military things that can happen before it becomes jingoism. Jingoism is really, it is right on it's similar to supremacy is what it is. Jingoism is crossing that line from pride to believing that your country is superior, and the only way of doing it, I guess, is a good way to put it. Does that make sense? Got it. Okay. Allie, what was your thing?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the sorry, I'm scrolling down to it. The questions about the mass violence and the school shootings. When it's talking about what all the school shootings have in common, from what I got from like the readings and lectures, is that it's like not what we stereotype like as like the bullied kid. It's usually the more normal kid or a normal person, and they're usually looking for a way to get infamous. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's good. There is definitely now also. I guess this is an element we don't really talk about. Being unpopular doesn't mean that you're mentally ill, right? So, like the bullied kids, they aren't the ones that are mentally, and that's not the indicating mental illness that causes mass shootings. It does tend to be those kids that are a little bit more popular. Actually, a lot of them are rather aggressive and are actually the bullies themselves. So that's a big portion of it. and then there's also that drive to or a mode to suicide as well. That is also a big real tell that the mass shooter often has either suicidal ideation, which means they've thought about killing themselves and planned it out, or they don't care about their own safety in any way. And that is a pretty, that's a very deadly combination. So the three things that combine there are, semi-suicidal or semi-suicidal ideation, access to a high-capacity weapon, and then inability to access mental health if they actually think they do need it. Yeah. It's not the bullied nerds. It really isn't. That's a total misconception, stereotype. And actually, a lot of the post-Columbine efforts to try to make that better actually made things worse for the nerdy kids. I can attest to that because that was me. I was in high school. I was a 10th grader when Columbine happened, and I was the nerdy one. Everyone was terrified all of a sudden. It sucked. Anywho, what else?
The question that's right below it, is it not just like kind of similar to the one that you just answered?
Which one?
What is the most common personal attribute of perpetrators of mass violence?
Yes, that's exactly what we just said. Yeah.
Well, I was asking about the one above it, is like the what do all school shootings have in common? Because I feel like those were so similar questions.
They're super similar. Yeah, it's the same thing basically. Okay. I would suspect that what that is a tell of is that when I do these, I am pulling from the test directly and looking at the test. That seems to indicate that one of them, that there are at least two questions that address that thing. Is what I would say.
Gotcha. Yeah, because that's what threw me off a little bit.
No. We just hacked the study guide. Good job. Let me see. Anything else we haven't touched on? So what's this moral panic thing? Because this is something people often misunderstand. Can anyone explain to me how a moral panic works or what a moral panic is?
From what I got from it, it's like when the media or someone brings some attention to something and people find, like, for example, like, I guess like terrorism, like you're assuming that everyone's going to be a terrorist, or like it's a bigger problem than it necessarily is, which causes a lot more panic, and people are like constantly looking over their shoulders because of it. But in reality, it's a small percentage of it actually happening.
Good. Yes, that's what it is. A moral panic is a situation in, well, there are kind of two ways it can go down. There is the purely fictional moral panic, which we saw around things like believing that video games cause mass violence, which is not backed up by science, and believing that the satanic panic, if you've ever heard of that, that occurred in the 80s and 90s when everyone thought that there were Satanists everywhere and they were infiltrating elementary schools and kidnapping children and secretly raping them. That never happened. Unfortunately, sexual assault happened, but it wasn't because of secret Satanism. So there are those purely fictional moral panics. And then there are moral panics that become grand exaggerations of the actual issue. So terrorism, especially terrorism as it occurred in the early 2000s, and that overwhelming national fear of terrorism in that era, you can talk about that in terms of a moral panic. Was it based on something? Was it based on a fear? Sure, it was. But this is one of my favorite stories, favorite, unfavorite stories. After 9/11, at my very small liberal arts school, way smaller than USC, actually, Dr. King, Colby King can tell you this too, because we went to the same school. We are the safety officers at the school were locking down every single building and making us chime in, and like we had like checkpoints basically across campus. No terrorist was ever going to focus on our school. We were just too damn small and too unimportant, right? That wasn't going to do anything, but it made people feel safe. Now, when we raised that issue, the public safety office, like the chief of public safety said to us, well, if you know who Osama bin Laden is going to bomb, then you should call the FBI, right? Just completely dismissing us, which today in 2020, it's pretty funny. But in 2001, like we were the jackasses for even bringing it up, right? And that's a good point too. Moral panics can, when you're in the middle of a moral panic, it is deadly serious, right? Because that's the nature of the thing, right? Because it sweeps society up into this kind of mindset. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, good. Now to go with that, what are folk devils? That's a very closely related concept, the concept of the folk devil.
They're responsible for deviant behavior, but more like really bad, evil things.
Yeah, it's so close. Anyone want to clarify on that? She missed a little smidge. The folk devils. Okay, so yeah, folk devils are the things that we, or the groups that we're afraid of when we're in the middle of a moral panic, right? That's the stuff we're panicking about, right? So if we use the comparison to the war on terror, the folk devil, our folk devil was either Al Qaeda in 2001 at least, it was Al Qaeda or Osama bin Laden, right? That was the folk. Think of it in like almost terms of like very old Christianity when people were afraid that the devil was actually out to get people. It's a similar kind of parallel. In those early days of the early 2000s, people thought that Al Qaeda was actually specifically going to be attacking like farm towns in the United States, right? People were convinced of that kind of thing, right? That's moral panic thinking, right? And it doesn't mean people are stupid. It means that that's our way of dealing with something. There are sociological principles there. It is kind of human nature. Does that make sense? So the folk devil is the big, bad, scary thing that we are afraid of during a moral panic. Now, I'll tell you one thing that people often mistake. I'm not going to say that. It will only confuse people. Never mind. I'll delete those sentences. Anything else? Let me see. You don't need to know the super specifics of the Patriot Act. Yeah, you don't need to know that super specifically. Just know what it was and what it did. It was the legislation passed in the October following September 11th that put basically a lot of surveillance and wiretapping back into our society. What makes a serial killer different than a mass murderer?
Well, a serial killer isn't at the same time, right? Like, it's over time, whereas a mass murderer is like shooting up, I guess the example would be a movie theater and then ending his life, where a serial killer could be like from that Netflix show Dexter, where he goes from like town to town killing people at random events.
Right. Yeah. Serial killers can move around. That's the most dangerous kind of serial killer because they're the least likely to get caught. And this is really something we would dig into in a sociological deviance course. The reason I bring it up here is because of our conversations about mass violence. And right, that's the big difference between spree killers and mass violence killers is that mass violence people kill a bunch of people all at once, while a serial killer will kill one, maybe two people at a time over a prolonged period of time. If you're interested in the number of that, you have to kill at least 3 people in 3 instances to be a serial killer. If you want to go down that route of murder nerdiness, if you will. What's polarization relating to people or ideas or whatever?
The continuous dividing of a group or idea.
Yeah. So, and what that has to do with modern society is, and this actually fed into a lot of the alt-right stuff in the 2016 election. It's fed into a lot of our politics in the United States for the last 20 years, probably for the last 40 years, is the division of Americans into being in 2 big separate camps, right? Of being a camp of Democrats and a camp of Republicans. And if your aunt is a Republican, you don't talk to her anymore. If your cousin is a Democrat, you unfriend him on Facebook, right? That sort of thing and that kind of dividing of people, that is the result of polarization. Polarization is something that sociologists have actually been warning about for at least 35 years now. And in the last 5 to 10 years, it's gotten much, much worse in our society. Yeah.
I mean, couldn't that be seen in sexuality too, where like gay people hate straight people, or like that, along with our political ideology, it's like a stereotype where gays and straights aren't meant to get along?
You could specifically, I mean, if that were happening in a specific community, there's definitely a piece of polarization relating to gender and sexuality in like politicizing gayness, right? So you're thought of, someone would be thought of as being a bad gay person if they were Republican, right? That could be seen as being the result of polarization. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. I think we are okay. Are there any final questions before we close up? Okay, I think we're in good shape. Just a reminder, because I don't really see you guys all that often and everything's all recorded. I do office hours Wednesday nights from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. If you have any issues like that, please let me know. I'm doing okay on email right now. I think I'm relatively caught up. I don't ever intentionally ignore emails. When I don't answer an email, it's well, I can't reliably answer emails over the weekends because I have 2 little kids. But I don't ignore emails out of malice, if you would think that. So if I don't answer an email from you within 48 hours, assume that I've missed it and maybe ask again. That's always helpful. I think that's good. So yeah, if you want to take that exam, just take it anytime now between now and 11:59 on Sunday night. Okay. And if you have any other questions, please let me know.
Cool. Wait, one question.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
So you said complete the study guide. Does that mean like complete it ourselves, or do you actually want us to like email it to you or something like that?
Yeah, you should be able to. Can anyone confirm this? You should be able to submit it in Blackboard. Is that right? Can you do it? Jenna says yes, we can. Yeah. So whatever works for you. Right. So the way the study guides work, I check them to make sure you do something, but I don't check them to make sure your answers are correct. Do something that will help you study, right? The easiest way to do that is to define all the terms and then turn that thing in, right? And submit that thing. Because, and that's what I talk about this all the time. It's called evidence-based practice. I have found that when students do that, they do 5 to 10% better on the exams. So like, I don't check your correctness on the study guides because I know if you didn't do the work, you're only going to hurt yourself, is the short of it. Yeah, good question, John.
So if I did mine on paper, can I just send you the pictures of my study guide?
Yeah, you can send it. What you can do is you can take a picture of that, and then you can even upload that picture. I'm fine with that onto Blackboard.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? That's actually becoming a lot more common as our camera phones are getting a lot better. I actually did that for one of my daughter's assignments in her class the other day when the teacher didn't know what he was doing. He's trying so hard, but he's real close to retirement. Okay, cool. I think I am going to call this done. Yeah, good luck. Thanks for being here. See you next time. Yeah, go ahead.
Does the exam have a
can log out if they want to. That's fine. I think it has a time limit of an hour. Let me take a look before we log out, actually. I have it right here. If anyone has to go, that's totally fine. My windows are in the way. So, yes, there's a time limit of 1 hour on the test. That's a real good question. There are, but if that makes you anxious, think about this. There are 25 multiple choice questions on the test, right? There are 2 essay questions. My experience is that students usually take about a minute on each question. And then that leaves you with about 5 to 10 minutes for each essay question. Yeah, so that's how that goes down, right? It is an open book, open note test. The main reason for the time limit is to make sure you understand that material, to make sure you understand the material, but you can have it with you and then you can look in your open book, open notes if you need it. If we have it being longer than an hour, even like much longer than that, then people just look up every single question. It's really the short of it. We need to make sure you know what you're talking about going into it. Good question. Okay. Anything else with those of you who are still here? Okay, cool. I'm gonna call it done. I'm gonna hit the end meeting button. I'll see you guys later.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hang in there. Keep wearing your masks, all that stuff.